Hello and welcome back to the Future is Bilingual podcast. My name is Heather and I'm very happy that you've decided to join me here today. If it's your first time listening, welcome to our little community. And if you've been listening either a few times or for the past 3 years, thank you so much for coming back and joining me for another episode. Today's topic is a bit controversial. I am going to recognize that right off the bat. The terms I'm using are controversial. So we are going to talk about native versus non-native language teachers. And I do recognize that I am playing into this problem by continuing to use the terms native and non-native. However, we are in such a paradigm right now where we need a new way of looking at it. And until we have that new way, I have to use the terms that are also being used in the greater community. And so we're here to talk about that. But I do recognize that, yes, those terms can be problematic. Yes, those terms do not explain the full picture. And that's exactly what we're here to talk about and think about today. So just know that I do recognize that this is problematic, hence why I'm creating this episode and why I want to talk to you guys and everybody about this topic. So in this episode, I'm going to tell you kind of my own reflections, my own musings on this topic, which are based, of course, on my own experiences. I am both a language learner. I've studied many languages over the years, and I continue to study languages. And I'm also a language teacher. So I currently teach 4 languages, in case you don't know. I teach French, Spanish, English, which is my native tongue, and Polish. And I will talk a little bit, I'll try and keep it brief, about my own experiences. And I do have kind of a big secret that I'm going to share with you guys. I don't really want to, but I think it's important in this discussion. And then I'm also going to talk about what we learned during the Polyglot Gathering, because I proposed having an open discussion on this topic, and I was really floored. I was shocked how many people came to discuss this topic with me. So I'll tell you a little bit what I learned from our discussion there. And yeah, let's dive right in. So another small thing that I just want to mention briefly is that I'm also toying with the idea of creating some of these podcast episodes in French as well. So in case you speak French, si vous parlez français, you can go and listen to this episode in French if you would prefer, or say maybe you're learning French and you would like to listen to this episode in French. French is my strongest foreign language. And so I hope that you will at least take a little listen and just see, because while it's the same topic, I'm guaranteed to say something a little bit differently because I'm not going to translate, just like I'm not reading a script right now. I'm just talking from my ideas. And yes, I have a little bit of notes, but alas, I'll keep it brief. Just wanted to be very transparent and let you guys know, see what you guys think. All right, merci. All right, so let's get right to it. I am going to talk about my own experiences first, because that is where we all come from. We all have to make sense of the world from our own experiences before we can compare with others. So I am American, born and raised in the northeast of the US, and I learned French. I learned a little Hebrew, but I'm not even going to count Hebrew. I started learning French in 6th or 7th grade, so I was about 11 or 12, and I learned almost exclusively from non-native teachers, all the way up until my junior year of college, when I went to study abroad. So even my professors at university, I think most of them were non-native teachers as well, which is just kind of interesting. I never thought, good or bad about it. It just was, right? I wasn't really thinking about this topic back then. I was just trying to learn the French language. And so, of course, going abroad was this really desirable thing. Learning from native teachers, that was a super rich and fascinating experience. Okay. My Spanish classes, on the other hand, I started Spanish at university. If you might have heard my story that I wanted to start in high school and was advised not to because I would confuse Spanish with French. So I started at university, and I had a good mix of native and non-native teachers, and that's because they had graduate students, doctoral students that were from Spain who would teach some of our classes. So I remember 2 of them specifically. They were both from Spain, 1 male, 1 female, and other teachers were, I remember non-native, but spoke very well. And, it was neither here or there, like I said. I wasn't really thinking about that when I was at university. And then I went to Costa Rica, and I obviously worked with all native teachers while I was in Costa Rica. But in the high school I taught at, we were all oh no, that's not true. We did hire my friend, and she's a native speaker from Venezuela. But yeah, the French teachers, all of us were non-native, and most of the Spanish teachers were also non-native. And that's pretty common, right? I think we can recognize French and Spanish are international languages, and many of the teachers are going to be non-native, just like with English, as we should know, right? When I learned Polish, I learned it from all native teachers. I've never had a non-native teacher of Polish. Even the people I talked to when I was learning Polish, every single person I ever spoke Polish with was a native speaker. I was the only non-native. And some of them were what we would call heritage learners. So they grew up hearing it from their parents, but kind of lost it because they grew up here. But they were still, that was their first language. That was the first language they heard. That was the language of their parents. And that was a really interesting experience because it just, we're going to get into this, some of the advantages, but people always said that my accent was very good. And I would say that definitely could be because Polish wasn't my first foreign language that I learned. So maybe my ear was already trained. But I think that's also highly due to the fact that I only heard natives, and you imitate, you copy what you hear. So I did my best to sound the way that they sounded. And, I don't know if that's good or bad to say, but it just was. That was my experience. Always talking to natives. Everybody I studied with, I studied with some teachers online. They were all natives. So now teaching Polish, that's a whole nother can of worms because I'm a non-native teacher. And when I was speaking to my children, I am the non-native speaker of this language that I was teaching them. So kind of interesting. Oh, I did want to mention, I was living in France the 4th year that I was studying Polish. And that was the first time in 4 years of studying this language that I had heard non-natives speak Polish, which was just such an eye-opening and kind of shocking experience because I was in France. And as many of us know, the French have a very heavy accent, right? When they speak English, you can tell right away it's a French person. Not always. There are plenty of French people who do not have that very strong accent, but I would say that the French accent is very easy to distinguish. And so hearing French people speaking Polish and hearing how Polish sounds with a French accent was a very interesting experience for me. When I studied Arabic, I started at university in the US. My teacher was from Sudan, but Arabic was not his first language. He told us all about how he heard his friends going to the Quranic school, and then he decided he wanted to learn Arabic, but it was not his first or second language even. And then I went to France, and about half of my teachers were natives and half of them were non-natives. And I just remember, and even to this day, I was just so impressed with my non-native teachers because I recognized how difficult and how different Arabic is from French and English, which are much closer structure-wise and everything. I was just so impressed with those non-native teachers. Like, wow, one day I would love to understand Arabic grammar. I would love to speak like these people speak. And I think that, even today. So I thought that in 2000, whatever year that was. And even today, when I work with my Arabic tutor and, I hear some of the people I follow online, I'm just so impressed at their level of Fusha, which is the, kind of eloquent, standardized, what we call modern standard Arabic. Okay. And then when I studied Italian, which I'm still studying, it was all self-study. So I didn't really do too much with teachers, but I listened to a lot of podcasts and a lot of content made by native teachers, like on Instagram, for instance. But I did do a couple Duolingo events when those were still around, and some were native teachers and some were non-native. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't, I was just happy to get some practice. But I think, as we're going to talk about, natives and non-natives, they both bring a different element into the classroom. So we'll get into that. Okay, so that's a little bit the languages that I have learned and studied. Okay, so let's get into now just a little bit my experiences teaching, because it's very different, right? From being a learner to being a teacher. And when I think about it, I actually had my first experience being a teacher in a classroom was an EFL, so English as a foreign language classroom, when I was still an undergraduate student in Burlington, Vermont. And so I was teaching, I was like a teacher's aide in a elementary school in downtown Burlington. And then I taught English to elementary school children in France for 2 years. And while I was there, I also tutored a lot of adults. I've also taught middle and high school students for about one semester. I was just filling in for someone at a charter school in the US. And I've worked at different, like library and town programs, again, working with new arrivals or immigrants. Usually these programs are for free, so the students don't have to pay. So that's what I've been doing recently. And I did that for about 1.5 years in my hometown library as well. So that's kind of my experience with English, which has been kind of inconsistent. It's been kind of all over and sporadic. So I'll do it for 1.5 years or 2 years, and then I'll stop for a couple of years, and then I'll do it again because an opportunity comes up, but I'll stop again. And I did have like a TESOL certification way back when I was first applying to teach in France. I actually was also hoping to teach. I wasn't sure if I would go to France. I was actually hoping to go to Korea way back when. So I was doing all these TESOL, whatever you pronounce it, certification programs and trying to get a job teaching abroad way back when, as I said. So the language that I really teach the most, or languages, are French and Spanish. Those are the languages that I have been certified in, taken certification. I've taught them in high schools, and I would even say I've taught French more than Spanish because, first of all, both of my degrees, my bachelor's is in French literature, French language and literature, and then my master's, Master in the Art of Teaching, is with a specialization in French and Francophone studies. So French is definitely my second language. It's my most dominant foreign language, and I've taught it to students of literally all ages. So I've worked with babies and my own children. So from 0 to 4, I was teaching online during the pandemic. It was more just singing, little songs and things of that nature, and colors and some basics. And it was also more teaching the adults in their life or their lives. And that way they could pass it on to their children, sing the songs with them again and talk about the colors and the numbers. Okay, so I've taught babies. I've taught, little elementary children, middle school, high school. I've taught just all ages. I've even worked with senior citizens, again, in these like town programs that we have, these extra, what do we call them? Enrichment programs. So I've taught senior citizens. I currently work with adults. And yeah, French is definitely my dominant language. I've done very similar ages with Spanish because I also taught the babies. That program I was doing online was also in Spanish. So I digress. Those languages, I am very confident with the grammar, very confident with vocabulary, more so French than Spanish, just more experience living there and, knowing all the slang and all that kind of stuff is more comfortable with French. But I've never really had an issue teaching those languages. They're in demand, and it is pretty acceptable, at least in the United States, to have a French teacher who's maybe not born and raised in, France or Quebec or some Francophone country. Maybe identity-wise, I would say I identify more with French than with Spanish for multiple reasons that I don't need to get into, but again, relating more to having lived there, being able to blend in and look like I am a French person when I go versus when I go somewhere in a Latin American country. I do not look like I'm Latina, but that's a whole nother can of worms. So just to keep this brief, what I'm trying to say is it's never been an issue in the US that I'm not native in French or Spanish. However, I have noticed websites. So if I'm trying to teach some extra classes or, do some tutoring or things like that, I have noticed a couple websites where they will say you have to be a native French speaker to even apply. And I've just been like, oh man, that's a bummer. And I will say that I've heard people say this about being an English teacher and, knowing the grammar better than a native English speaker. And that is 100% true. And I can say the same for myself with French. I understand the grammar much better than I understand English grammar, and also possibly much better than just your average French person or Francophone person who doesn't really care so much about grammar, because languages are my passion. Languages are my career. Languages were my studies. So I have spent so many hours looking at this, trying to understand this, writing all my papers have been written in French, things like that. It's just, that's what I do from, work, passion, my hobbies. That is what I enjoy doing, is making sense of this grammar. So, and I actually have some accounts that I follow as well for Arabic where they've said that, she lives in Cairo, and she will catch errors in people's fusha, in their, modern standard Arabic. She'll see errors in books. And I don't think that's that unusual, because when this is your life, this is your passion, you are going to catch little errors that someone who doesn't really care about language to that, detailed and precise extent, they're just going to care about communication, that they're not going to notice that there's little tiny things. Okay. Like, I do the same with English. I will notice typos, apostrophes in the wrong place. Even my lawyer has errors in her English, and I'm like, oh my gosh, how are you earning what you're earning and your English is so... Anyway, yeah, I think it's kind of shocking, the errors that are made in people's native languages, because they don't pay attention to that. And I'm not saying, oh, I'm better because I notice these errors. It's just, that is what I enjoy. I enjoy, looking at those sorts of things, and I enjoy grammar. And it's just, we all have our different strengths, right? And I am very nitpicky and perfectionistic, and that's a very annoying thing, but it's really good if you want to catch errors like that. Okay. And then the last thing, so I talked about, my experience with English, French, and Spanish, but I also have been teaching Polish, and Polish is very much not my native language. It is not even my strongest language. And yet, many of you know, I was raising my children in Polish. That was their first language. And yeah, that was scary. And I will, I'm working on getting something out about actually something I presented at the Women in Language Conference a few years ago about, challenges that come up and different solutions and things you can do if you are that non-native parent who's raising bilingual children in your non-native language. But you'll have to wait for that future publication. But yeah, I think that right now I'm teaching just adults, and that's a really rewarding experience. And I do worry that, I don't know everything. I do have a mix of beginner, kind of high beginner, and low intermediate. And I do try and keep my lessons to things that I know I can accurately teach them. So I'm not going to, launch us into something where I'm not going to be certain. I definitely prepare for my lessons. I read the book in advance, and I look up any vocab that I'm not positive how exactly I would translate it, because I know they're going to ask, well, what is that word exactly? So it's good for me to know not just the gist and the sentence and what's happening, but I should know the words exactly, so that if they do ask me, I am prepared to explain to them. And it's been yeah, it's kind of been a scary experience. Like I said, I first was giving lessons for free because I thought, who am I? I have no qualifications to be doing this. But the reason I actually started giving the Polish lessons for free on Duolingo was I missed teaching so much. So many of you know I was doing a PhD up in Canada, and I was a student again, which was very fun, but I just really missed teaching. Teaching, I realized during that time, was really my calling. It's my passion. I really, really enjoy being with a group of students. I enjoy helping them see different things for themselves. And I just really missed it. And the only way I could think about getting back into it was doing these Duolingo events, which I loved so much in Italian. I thought, you know what? Nobody's really offering Polish. There was one guy, and his class was for like intermediate and advanced. I'm like, well, what do all the beginners do? There's so many people, many, many more learners on Duolingo of Polish are beginners than intermediate or advanced. So I was like, I got to do something for these beginners. I'm sure I can help them practice those basic words. And that's what we've been doing. And it's been really rewarding. And the feedback, I was getting so much feedback with that structure because Duolingo would, after every single lesson, so every single week, they sent to all your students, please, give us your feedback on how the lesson was. And so these lessons were free. There was 50 people like every week. And if they gave some feedback and wrote a little blurb, it was amazing. I was getting so much feedback. And people were really saying how helpful it was. And I was really transparent. I was like, hey, I speak this language. Here's why I speak it. And I would literally tell them things that I messed up on. I said, hey guys, for 6 months, I was saying this the wrong way. When someone finally corrected me, and I was like, oh man, why did they wait 6 months? It was already kind of ingrained in my head. Or, I would tell them words that I slipped up on, or words that were really similar sounding that would cause me trouble at the beginning. And I just really pointed them in all those directions of like, here's how I messed up as a non-native, or here's what I found tough. Here's what natives don't really understand that we don't understand. Like why I understand that that's going to be hard for you because it was hard for me. But when you're learning with a native teacher, they don't understand why you don't get it. It's so normal in their head. So let me give you an example since we're speaking in English. For many of us, for most of us, I would say, the verbs make and do, we just know when to use them. Like we know that we do the dishes, but we make the bed and we do our homework, right? That's just very normal. But when you have a language, actually like most languages, French, Spanish, Polish, they have just one verb that means both make and do. It's very hard to separate those out. And, when we're learning Spanish as Americans, it's hard for us to do the ser and estar, 2 verbs to be, or the por para, the 2 words that mean for. It's very similar in that sense where, we're just, I don't know how to teach that as an English native. Like to make and to do, I have to look at these lists and these exercises that have probably been created by non-native speakers because they themselves struggled to know which one is which. I'm amazed when I'm preparing for my English classes and I'm reading up on the grammar and I'm looking at the exercises. And it's true. I mean, it's really true that natives, we don't see how hard it is. We don't see the struggles that the learner is going to have per se. Like I look at my examples and I'm like, yep, this will be a good exercise. This is going to be great. And then we do it in class and like, whoa, it's so hard for them. And I'm like, why is this so hard? And even I used to work under a French teacher who was a native French teacher from Senegal. And I remember her telling her, this was high school, like 9th grade high school. So those kids are like 14. And she would tell them, okay, here's the activity you're going to do. This should take you 2 minutes. And then I'm thinking, oh my God, this is going to take them like at least 8 to 10 minutes to do because this is not that easy for them. They're in French too. They're just learning how to conjugate. And she's like, you should be able to do this in 2 minutes. And she was like very, what's the word? Just, I guess, like Tiffany said in our previous episode, rigoureux. Right? Elle était très rigoureuse. Like, she was just very, like, not strict, but just rigorous. Like, come on, get this done. This should be easy. And I think she really just didn't see, because for her, it would take her 2 minutes, or it would take her 1 minute. So she like doubled the time, thinking, oh, okay, it should take them 2. But I was like, oh no, like these kids are going to need at least a couple, 5-10 minutes to think about this. So yes, we as natives, we have lots of blind spots that a non-native teacher doesn't necessarily have. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? It just is. Okay, I'm saying this as a very neutral, from a very neutral position. Not one is better or one is worse, because the native teacher comes with a lot of advantages. They're going to push you. They're going to get you to, speak more and converse more versus, maybe if this is, what I've heard. We can get a little bit into what people said during our discussion at the Polyglot Gathering this past, it was the end of March, so just a month ago. Some people did say that they found, and again, it was a room full of polyglots, they found that the native teachers, conversation partners, they just wanted to get you to talk. Like, okay, come on, share your experiences. Whereas a non-native teacher was very focused on pronunciation, grammar, not overcorrecting, but correcting you a lot. They were much more insistent, like, get this right from the get-go. And it's probably in your best interest, like they're doing this to help you. Like, okay, if you can pronounce this correctly from the beginning, you're not going to run into these issues where people won't understand you because are you saying, roux or rue, vous or vu, things like that. They're trying to help you from a place of good, I'm sure. But they're not letting you just kind of talk the way a native might just like let you talk. And this is 100% true in my case. Somebody said that and it really rang true because when my mom was learning French, I was so critical and I was like, you have to say this way, don't pronounce it like this. And I was just really hard on her. And the same person, I was with my English learners and I would just let them talk, and they were saying some things were really hard to understand. But I was like, oh, I don't want to stop them. I don't want to discourage them. So I just kind of let them make these mistakes and say these things that were not necessarily pronounced correctly, but I didn't want to stop their flow. So yes, I think in my case, that rings super true, that I'm trying to help students when I'm the non-native teacher, but when I'm a native teacher, I'm just like encouraging them, like, you can do it. Yeah, I don't want to be too hard on you. So it's, yeah. So just a little bit about me in French before I get on. So this is kind of a big secret that I don't really tell people. But when I was in high school, I took AP French. It was offered my junior year because we had semesters, kind of like colleges do. So I was able to finish all the French courses before my senior year. And guess what? As I just professed, I'm like a dedicated French teacher. French is my strongest second language. I failed my AP French test. That's right. Failed. 1 out of 5. And yeah, that hurt, it was sad. But I realized I didn't let that failure stop me. And I just was like, okay, that test was all grammar. My teacher, love her. I'm still in contact with her. She was my colleague. I have so many good words about this teacher that I had. She made our French class so much fun. We were making skits, we were writing, we were using the language, we were talking. We were doing TPRS, which is total physical response storytelling. So we were acting and we were moving our bodies, and it was very kinesthetic and just fun. And she, no doubt, is part of the reason why I fell in love with French. But she didn't teach to the test. And thank God. Tant mieux. Nice. It's much better that she didn't teach us to the test, because I still love French. I started to love French in her class, and I continue to love it. And, if she had taught us to the test, who knows? Maybe I would have sucked the love and passion of French completely out of me, and I would have gone in a whole different direction, right? So that test, I should say, the AP French test way back when, the early 2000s, is very different. They've changed it since, and it's a way better test. I mean, the test back when I took it was 100% grammar. Do you know the subjunctive, and can you conjugate all the different past tenses correctly and in the right time, and narrate correctly in the past, and blah, blah, blah. All these things, complicated things, conditional. And we weren't prepared for that test. But I didn't let that stop me, right? Like, when I think about that now, I just think, okay, I failed my French test. But look, now I'm a French teacher. I have a master's in French. I speak French to a very high level. And that failure was just a little blip on my timeline. And I could have let that blip completely, crash and burn my future and my love of French. But for me, it was just, okay, like, I'm not there yet. I don't understand the grammar yet. And I just need to keep working on it. And so it was more like a wake-up call. And I didn't go into my university studying French. I actually was going to do education. And then I changed to be a French major because I loved it so much. I was taking it for fun again, and I just fell in love and continued to study it. But I digress. So I just want to say that, if there is something that you failed at and something that you find hard, that doesn't mean it's the end, right? It doesn't have to be, I failed at this thing, so it will never happen. Okay, like I failed my driver's test and now I'll never drive. No, it's just you weren't ready yet, right? I failed my French test and I still majored in French, studied abroad, then I lived in France for 2 years, right? I still kept my love and my passion for French, France, French language in general, la francophonie, alive. Okay, so let's get into this last part, which is what I wanted to talk about, which is the Polyglot Gathering, which happened at the end of March this year, at least the online part of that conference. There is an in-person happening in Teresin, Poland. Same place it was last year, near, it's a little bit outside of Warsaw. If you're interested in going to that, you can look them up online. Okay, so first and foremost, I just want to say, like I said, this topic was not even front of mind until very recently for me. I mean, a little bit, I would think, oh gosh, I'm a better French teacher than I am an English teacher. How is that possible when English is my native language? But it's completely possible, as we're realizing more and more, is that there are definite advantages to having learned the language yourself, and there's definite advantages to being a native speaker and teacher as well. So I'm going to delve into those a little bit and what I learned by discussing this with others at the Polyglot Gathering. So, of course, these were people with lots of experience learning languages, some of them also teachers. And I learned a couple things. I learned a lot of things. The first thing I learned is that you should never ask a room full of polyglots to tell you what languages they've studied. That was a huge waste of time. And I could have just said, put them in the chat, and then we would have been, off and running. Because I wanted to, when I teach online, I really like to establish that connection and have people just, kind of say hello, introduce themselves briefly. However, these are polyglots. So even the briefest of introductions of like, hi, this is who I am, this is the languages I've studied, takes way too long because they've studied a lot of languages, and then a lot of them have taught a lot of languages, and then people also kept joining, which was fantastic. But I really didn't expect it to just kind of snowball out of control the way it did. So next time, I've learned, you ask people to introduce themselves quickly in the chat, and yeah, people can read it if they want to, but at least then the discussion could have gotten started sooner. So if you were there, if you watched the replay, I do apologize for that. Just didn't really think it through. So you live, you learn. Okay. I also thought, okay, we're going to come up with some like kind of clear advantages and disadvantages, but really what came out of our discussion was much, much, much more nuanced, gray. Not that it depends. Just the things that came up were difficult to just put in this nice, pretty box and organize. But I will discuss a little bit about what I believe to be the advantages and disadvantages based on what I heard. And I did listen to it again to just make sure I didn't miss anything key. Okay. I do need to say something really briefly, though, before I get into that, which is learning your first language, what we call your L1 when we talk about language learning. That is a very, very different situation from learning an L2. So a subsequent language, your second language, your third language, right? Or L2 plus. Any other languages that you learn after your first. Now, if you grew up simultaneously with two languages, those would both be like your L1, but that is a very different situation to someone who grew up monolingual, right? So if you had two languages from birth or from a very young age, your brain had this flexibility, this plasticity already, where it was like, oh, hey, these are not the same language, I thought I was hearing differences, and yes, they are different. And then you learned to recognize the two systems, that there were two linguistic systems going on. You recognized with whom you should be speaking, which one. You were constantly, right? You weren't even really conscious of this fact, but you were constantly comparing them. Like, oh, so wishka and spoon are the same thing. That's weird, but I shouldn't say wishka to this parent or to this grandparent. Your brain was doing this subconsciously. So, you can't say that someone who grew up with two languages, from a young age is the same as someone who grew up monolingual when you're talking about languages that you've learned afterwards. Yeah, it's a very different situation. So let's just keep that in mind when discussing this. Okay, so let me give you some of what I thought and some of what came out of our discussion as advantages and disadvantages. Native speakers have the advantage of having an accent, which is considered, native. Again, I'm doing air quotes, but you can't see me because this is a podcast. And a lot of people mentioned how important accent is because it is literally the first thing people notice about you. Okay, maybe they notice your physical appearance, and then the minute you open your mouth, they notice your accent. And that's just how humans are, right? We're going to be judging you, but like putting you in a box, right? Like, oh, wow, she sounds, French. Maybe she is French, even though she looks like she's from somewhere else. Okay. So yes, accent is clearly something that's important, and it is something we can work towards, right? There are definite things you can do to work towards your accent. Now that's another debate. Should you try and have a native or near native accent, or should you just accept that you have this accent and it's charming because it's a little bit different and you don't sound native, and that's kind of nice? I can't answer that question for you. That is definitely something that you yourself have to think about. And do you really want to work on it, or are you happy with the accent you have? Again, I can't answer those questions for you, but a native teacher, someone who has grown up. Oh, I just realized there is a huge issue that I didn't even bring up. What does it mean to be native? So when I talked about those people, let's say someone who grows up bilingually with two languages, are they native in both? We know that people tend to have a more dominant language, even when you grow up with two, depending on the circumstances, where you've lived, where you've studied, what you spend most of your time in which language, that's going to kind of influence which one is your dominant language. So is a native speaker just someone who spoke it as their first language? Someone who speaks it as their dominant language, but it wasn't their first language? There's so many questions, right? This is not as clear cut as we think it is. And thank you. This is a DJ who came in at the very end of the discussion, the Polyglot Gathering, excuse me. And he brought this up, and I was like, oh my gosh, thank you. Like, this should have been at the top of this episode. This should have been at the top of our discussion. That what does that even mean, right? I think it's a very, very monolinguistic view of the world to be like, oh, native and non-native, because that's assuming someone has lived their whole life, all of their experiences, right? Like parents, growing up as a baby, all their schooling, et cetera, has been in one language, but many people's experience does not follow that. They have a home language. They have a language at school. Maybe they have a different language with their friends outside of school. There's just, there's language mixing. If we look at different countries around the world, there's so many languages at play, communities and societies that are very multilingual. It's just you can't put these two boxes where it's just native and non-native, because it's much less clear than it's gray. It's not this black and white thing that we can just say he's a native and she's not, so we should hire him over her, per se. Okay. Again, so I'm just starting with the advantage, right? I said that the accent is quote unquote better. Again, by whom? Who decides what's better? Better, what does that mean? We do need to recognize that languages are something that is at play in this political system, right? So languages have power, right? Why is English the lingua franca? Why does English have so much power? Why is a certain accent in English better received than another one, right? Like British English versus my accent in English versus a Southern accent from the US. Why is one of them perceived as better or smarter or what have you? Okay, that is a whole nother can of worms that I cannot get into right now. That is a whole nother issue. But yes, accent was brought up in our discussion. And we all do, even if we don't agree with the idea of like, oh, this accent is better than another one, we're against that idea. We do still want to speak, oh, but I do want to speak correctly. I do want to sound like a native. So we are all trying to go towards that. And for good reason, right? As a language teacher, I do recognize that having a clear accent, having clear speech is going to help you, because when you're speaking with other people, they're going to understand you more easily. They're not going to keep asking you, huh? What? Can you repeat? I didn't get that. I don't know what you're trying to say. So if the goal of language is communication, accent does play a huge role in whether or not you're understood. So yes, it's a double-edged sword in a way, because it's like we want it, but like we need it. But it also, I mean, personally, I love accents. I think people, when they have their different accents, speaking English or French or what have you, I find it so charming. And I would hate if we all sounded the same, if we all had the same accent when we spoke. I think the world would be so boring. But I digress. The other advantage that I had here was just, I said knowledge, but by knowledge, I mean you are confident and certain. Like, yep, this is how we say it. You don't second guess yourself. You don't wonder, oh, geez, is that the right grammar case? Or, oh, did I say that correctly? Or is there a better way? Is there a more natural way? Like, you just know. Right? When I teach English, I know. I'm like, yep, that's how we'd say it. I do second guess myself sometimes, like, how often do I say that expression? Sometimes I tell them expressions that are, idiomatic, and I'm like, well, I don't really use that, but you could use it. So yeah, it's not 100% like natives do everything correctly. No, definitely not the case. Okay. However, just sticking with the native teachers, they have a lot of disadvantages. One being that they did not learn this language the way that their students are, meaning they learned it as their L1, if we're talking about native, right? Not as an L2 or a subsequent language. So they're not in the same shoes, and I already alluded to this, as their students. They cannot understand why their students find this so hard. And that's a huge disadvantage, because when you have done that thing, right, this being a disadvantage for the natives, it's an advantage for the non-natives, right? If you have the experience of having learned the language yourself, having, fallen into the same mistakes that you see your students now falling into. Oh, yes, I remember when I used to do that. Oh, hey, you can warn them ahead of time. Don't fall into this trap. Careful with these. Watch out for this, right? You're like guiding the way and pointing out all of the potholes because you've been down that road. Whereas, the native teacher is just kind of flying up ahead like a bird, never having touched the road, and like, I have no idea what you guys are talking about. What are you stumbling on down there? Just come on. And they're just like flying gracefully ahead with no concept of what's happening on the ground. I just came up with that out of nowhere. I don't know where that came from. Okay. The other disadvantage, which is true in my case, is that you maybe don't really have a great understanding of the grammar and how the language works. And hey, I did say I read a lot in English. I write eloquently, I've done a lot of studies and degrees, but even so, I don't know the names, or I didn't until teaching, the names of all the, the tenses, like present progressive or past perfect continuous, or I don't even know, like even saying them now, they still sound very foreign to me. I'm like wondering if I'm even saying it correctly, like simple past or past simple. It's not the same as like the French grammar system for me. I'm like, oh yeah, le participe passé, like I know all these things, like how does the subjunctif work, all the irregulars, all the things to watch out for when you do the accord, when you agree in the past tense with avoir, and when you don't, all the things, right? Like that is my specialty. That is something I know very, very well, like the back of my hand. And English grammar, I can tell you how to say it. I can tell you what's correct, but I can't explain why. I have no idea what else is related to that, right? Like what else I should be teaching around that or next to that to compare it to. And yes, books will help you, websites, there's things that will help you, but you have to look that up. You can't just throw a native teacher into the classroom who has no knowledge of how to teach or what to do and hope that they can explain this to students. They cannot. They cannot. And that is a huge issue. Is, really one of the main things we learned from this discussion was it's not even about native versus non-native. It is about who you are as a teacher. Do you have teaching experience? Do you have experience with other languages? What languages do we share? Meaning you, the teacher, and the student or students. Do you have languages in common? There's just so many things I could say on this topic, but it's really not about what language you grew up speaking to your parents at all. But we make that the biggest issue, and wrongfully so. Okay, let me get to the non-native, just the little things that I, notes that I took so I can be clear here. Okay, so the non-native, as I already kind of mentioned, they know all the common pitfalls. They have a lot of knowledge and experience learning the language, learning the grammar, learning the vocab. They've been down that road, as I already mentioned, the same road as the students. They are like walking right in front of you. They're just a little bit ahead of you, showing you where to go. A disadvantage, of course, can be, not always, but can be the accent. It can be that you're maybe not so sure of what you're teaching. So you're second guessing yourself. You're like, oh, I hope I taught that correctly. Let me check with someone, or let me get this read over by, someone who has this as their first language. And then the biggest disadvantage to being a non-native teacher is the discrimination, that you might not get hired, and someone who just happens to have spoken that language as a child will get hired over you, even if your resume is much better. That's huge, I think that's probably the worst disadvantage that we have as non-native teachers. But yes, some things I don't want to talk too long about this, because I could stay on this topic for hours, and it's only me talking, so I don't want to lecture at you too long. But we do need to recognize some things here. First is there's always a political undercurrent with languages. Even just talking about language, is it a language or a dialect? Is it a language or a regional language? Or, there's so much politics when we talk about languages and accents and dialects and the variations, right? We have to acknowledge that. And in this discussion, people also brought up Indigenous languages and, how they always learned Indigenous languages from a native speaker. And I mean, there's reasons for that, right? We also talked about the more common languages like English, French, and Spanish. They have many foreign teachers because they're international languages, whereas there are languages that are much, much less common. So, Polish, Mandarin, different languages that it's much more common to have a native teacher because they're not studied as like widely as those other languages are. And yes, it also made me think a little bit about, somebody mentioned, Canada, how you have to take French, and there could be unqualified teachers being hired just to fill the gap because you have to have a teacher in the school. And so, there's different reasons, right? There's definitely a lot of political underpinnings here. Like, French in Quebec is surrounded on all sides by English, being invaded by this international world, right? Lingua franca. So they have to fight so much in Canada to keep French alive, to keep it an important language. It's a bilingual country. But again, that can have these negative consequences like unqualified teachers. So it's much a more bigger issue of like, are you a good teacher? Do you know how to teach? What is your teaching style? Does that style work with the students, right? Like, do you feel good with that teacher? Do you like their style or not? Even like I mentioned earlier, like, do you have languages in common? Because that can really help. When you have languages in common, you have this understanding of the world and languages where you can explain things. The relationship you have with a teacher is so important, and developing that connection to them, the trust, and just even the fact if they inspire you or not. I think I mentioned that with my Arabic teachers. And you want to keep studying under someone who inspires you. And having a non-native teacher can be much more inspiring because, like, wow, look at this. Like, they went from 0 to that, and that's what I want to do. I also want to go from 0 to that level, hopefully one day. So really, when we're talking about native versus non-native, we get to the question of like, what is a good teacher? It's not the language they spoke as a baby or heard as a baby. There's so many other factors involved, and I just think there's ways that we can work around this. That was another topic we talked about. Like, well, what do we do? Like, we're kind of stuck in this world of hiring teachers based on native versus non-native. We hear there's so many videos and ads, and everything's just in this paradigm of native versus non-native. Talk like a native, sound like a native, study with these native teachers. One of my good friends, Heidi, she brought up a really good point. She's like, yep, I recognize this. And she said she studies on italki. She purposefully takes lessons from both native and non-native teachers. So here's what she said. She's like, when I'm with the natives, they focus more on like chatting together, just conversing and having conversation. And then when she's with her non-native teacher, they focus more on grammar and being more nitpicky. But she's like, it's great because I take what I learned from my non-native teacher who's like super focused on the grammar, and then I get to use that when I'm with my native teacher. And it's really great because she's making a win-win out of the situation, right? And there are two sides to the coin. It's not that one is good and one is bad. It's just two sides of the same coin, and you can use them both to your advantage. So yes, she's been lucky. She's found teachers that she loves to work with, and they both she's using their advantages and not worrying about the disadvantages. And people did bring up like the fact of having a language partner or, a private tutor. You can ask specifically what you want to focus on. Like, hey, today, can we just talk, and can we like forget grammar? Just, correct me if it's like super bad, but like just let it go if it's small. Obviously, if you can find a language exchange partner, that's amazing because that's cost saving and great and really enriching for both of you. It's a win-win. Having a private tutor obviously is going to cost more money, but it's definitely worth it, right? And I have experience with my private Darija tutor, so Moroccan Arabic dialect, and I can just say so many good things about her. She speaks the dialect, but she also speaks a Slavic language as her native language, which we share because I know some Polish, so we can sometimes compare to Slavic languages. I'll be like, oh, is that like this? And she's like, yeah. she speaks Spanish because she lives in Spain. And so sometimes she'll compare things, the way they say I like is similar to me gusta, me gustan. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like all she had to do was say, it's like me gusta, me gustan. Boom, I got it, right? Like it was so much easier than if she had to explain how it works to me if I didn't already speak Spanish, right? So having a teacher who shares different languages with you can be super helpful and just much more fun. And yeah, I really can't say enough good things about the way that she teaches. And I hope that this is how I come off when I'm teaching, Polish, for example, or French or Spanish for that matter. That, I have a lot of experience. I can help you because I know from my own experience, my own trials and tribulations, but also the enthusiasm, the dedication. I just think that hopefully will come off because you wouldn't still be doing something like this, which is really hard, unless you loved it, right? It is much easier to just stay in your little monolingual bubble, especially with English as a, first or native language. Like you could just live your whole life in English, but how boring would that be? So it is hard to push yourself out of your comfort zone and out of your bubble. But yeah, I think just to end this, we definitely have a lot of work, a lot of work to be done to change this whole putting nativism on a pedestal. And that's what we all need to reach. And that's the only people who should be teaching. No way. That is definitely not the case. I've had such good non-native teachers. I hope, and I try so hard every, class that I teach to be a really, really good non-native teacher, because it's not a matter of what language you speak first. It's a matter of how you teach, the things you focus on, the relationship you have, the knowledge you bring. So rather than keep talking about this, I would love, love, love to hear your thoughts, your comments. So if you guys don't know where to find me, you can find me on Instagram at The Future is Bilingual, all one word, no spaces or anything. I have a website, WordPress, The Future is Bilingual. And I would love to hear your comments either on Instagram, on my website. You can write me an email. You can find my contact information on the website or on Instagram. Would love to hear your thoughts on this. And I know that there will be many, as it is kind of controversial, but I super, super look forward to having that conversation with you guys in the comments or in the DM. Please reach out. Let's get a conversation going about this. And yeah, it was a pleasure as always to be with you guys. And I wish you a wonderful week of language learning, language teaching, making the future more bilingual. Take care. Ciao.